What if I told you the most legendary racing EH was a car that technically wasn't supposed to exist? Most people have heard the Holden EH and the S4, but very few know about the S5 and the S22, or the secrets hidden beneath their skins. I'll be taking a deep dive into the EH and its rarest models, focusing on the details the history books missed. So stick to the end, because I guarantee you'll learn something about these cars that you never knew. But first, we have to go back in time, not all the way back to 1948, when Holden started manufacturing cars, like the original FX, powered by the venerable grey motor, so named because of the colour of its cylinder block, Holden Engine Grey. There's a popular workshop legend that suggests Holden added a touch of green paint to help camouflage oil leaks, which were apparently very common on the early motors. Returning to the story, in 1957, the Automobile Manufacturers Association, or AMA, enacted a racing ban to bolster the industry's public image. This voluntary agreement, prompted by the 1955 Le Mans disaster and the threat of government regulation, compelled US automakers to withdraw from factory-supported racing and de-emphasise speed. While many manufacturers, including Chevrolet, largely ignored this agreement, it would later resurface to throw a spanner in Holden's works. Which brings us to the turning point, the changeover from the EK to the EJ series. You see, the EK was effectively the last of the old style Holdens, serving as a final refinement of the styling that had begun with the FB. The EK was followed by the EJ, which was a significant update, boasting a sleeker, lower profile and more compact design, and noticeably losing those large tail fins. However, apart from the EJ's updated and more modern look, under the skin it was still pretty much the same car as the EK it replaced. All EJs continue to be powered by the venerable 138 cubic inch inline 6 grey motor, equipped with a Bendix Stromberg downdraft carburettor, which delivered a humble 75 horsepower, a relic of the 1930s and based on Buick straight 6 architecture. The 138 grey motor only managed a mere 15 horsepower increase over its 1948 predecessor. Also, the Grey's 4-bearing crankshaft was a known weak point, often breaking if over-revved in the pursuit of performance. But as Holden was selling cars as quickly as they could make them, they saw little incentive in modernising the engine, the rudimentary kingpin suspension and its inadequate drum brakes. It was also around this time the Light Car Club of Australia, or LCCA, with the sponsorship of Armstrong York Engineering, put together a race to test family sedans and their reliability over a 500-mile course, initially known as the Armstrong 500 and restricted to stock standard sedans. This event would eventually evolve into the legendary Bathurst 1000, initially being held at Phillip Island for its first 3 years before moving to Bathurst in 1963 due to safety concerns, plus also shifting to the October long weekend. This race was exclusive to locally manufactured or assembled cars, making imports ineligible, but funnily enough, not cars built from CKD kits. During the Phillip Island era, a Holden EK number 33 was entered for the 1961 race, driven by Ian Strachan and John Lanyon, but unfortunately, Lanyon's Holden EK lost a wheel at Siberia Corner. He rejoined using borrowed nuts off the other wheels, but the team was disqualified for using illegal off-site spares. As a matter of interest, this race was won by the legendary pairing of Bob Jane and Harry Firth, but driving a Mercedes-Benz 220 SE. Funnily enough, the previous year saw 2 homegrown entries in Class D, both Ford XK Falcons, of which one did not finish. It was at this point that drivers realised the grey motor was being outclassed by a new generation of competition, notably the likes of the Ford XL Falcon and upcoming Cortina GT. To make things worse, in January 1963, GM chairman Frederick Donner would revisit the AMA's racing ban and issue his own total ban on all factory-sponsored racing worldwide. He wanted GM to prioritise the production of family sedans, moving away from the street racer mentality, which would also have a knock-on effect for Holden's racing ambitions. But this was all about to take another turn, because in August 1963, and designed by Stan Parker, the EH series would be released. With Holden's racing ambitions for Bathurst growing, work on their contender would run in tandem with the development of the now released EH model. But more of this later. When the Holden EH debuted in 1963, Wheels magazine famously remarked,
"It was as different from its predecessor, the EJ, as 8 cylinders are from 6.
Now, let's take a look at the car. The EH featured a bolder front profile, retaining its classic round headlights, but updating them with a more pronounced heavy-duty frame, adopting a new power-swept styling. The rear design shifted toward a modern, angular silhouette. The boot was noticeably boxier than that of its predecessor, featuring completely redesigned rear fenders and boot lid, complemented by larger, vertically aligned tail lights. The EH was available in 4 distinct body styles: station wagon or station sedan, panel van, utility or ute, and of course the sedan, which was itself available in 3 different trim levels. The standard or basic model featured no additional trims or fittings, but rubber mats with a vinyl interior and front bench seats, painted in a single solid colour, no side badging, and often served as taxis or hire vehicles. Then there was the Special. This was the most popular model, adorned with stainless steel side trims, chrome special badges on the front fenders, also offered in a wider range of exterior colours, and typically being paired with a Fowler's Ivory colour roof. The interior featured a full-width foam padded bench seat trimmed in Elasco fab upholstery, complemented by 2-tone vinyl finishes. Safety and comfort were enhanced by a padded instrument panel and integrated port armrests on the front doors. And finally the Premier, the flagship, boasting a full leather interior, bucket seats and centre console, a push-button AM radio and armrests on all 4 doors, sedans only. Exclusive metallic paint with magic mirror finish, with Premier badging on the C-pillars and boot. The EH's debut would also mark the end of a defining era as Holden's workhorse, the grey motor, a mainstay since the original 1948 Model FX, was finally being retired. After 15 years of service and a total production run of 1.4 million units, the very last grey rolled off the assembly line on August 2nd, 1963. The big news, however, was the introduction of the new Holden red motor. Just like its grey predecessor, the red motor was so named after the distinctive Holden Special Red colour of its cylinder blocks. Although the red's underlying architecture was conceived at the GM Technical Centre in the US, its final development was the work of Australian engineers. Led by Ed Sillins, the team tailored the engines to meet local requirements, ensuring that the finished product was a truly Australian-built power plant to suit the Holden's dimensions. The production of this engine would take place at the new £11 million Fisherman's Bend plant, and once in production, it became the responsibility of Holden Engineering, featuring an over-square design where the bore diameter exceeds the stroke, and utilising 2 overhead valves per cylinder, operated via a traditional pushrod and rocker system. It also introduced hydraulic valve lifters, a first for Holden, plus an external oil pump and filter for easier maintenance. Additionally, it received a redesigned gasket system which significantly improved reliability by reducing the likelihood of oil leaks, so no special mix grey paint for these blocks. Another significant upgrade was a 7-bearing crankshaft from the 4-bearing of the grey, which would go on to dramatically reduce the risk of crankshaft breakage. The basic design of the red will continue to evolve, eventually increasing to 3.3 litres before transitioning into a fuel-ejected 3.3 litre black in the Holden Commodore VK series. On its release, the red was available in 3 variants, all using a Bendix-Stromberg single-barrel downdraft carburettor, a 149 cubic inch or 2.4 litre engine using an 8.8 to 1 compression ratio and developing 100 horsepower, 33% more than the grey and standard on the standard EH and Special. There was also a lower compression version of the 149 available with a compression ratio of 7.7 to 1, which pushed 95 horsepower, aimed at fleet owners, farmers and budget conscious drivers. Then the mighty 179 cubic inch or 2.9 litre engine, also using an 8.8:1 compression ratio and developing 115 horsepower, 53% more than the grey. Standard on the Premier and optional on the Standard and Special. All 179 equipped EHs received the classic 179 badge on the boot driver's side. On the EH's release, two transmissions were available, the 3-speed Holden manual and the 3-speed Hydromatic automatic. Both were column shifts. For the Standard and Special, using the 149 engines, the manual transmission was a standard configuration, although the auto was optional. While initially the 179 was only available with the Hydromatic automatic 3-speed, since the existing 3-speed manual was considered not able to handle the 179's power. The 179 engine and automatic transmission were standard on the Premier, but were an available option for the Standard EH and Special. Interestingly, these models also far outsold the more exclusive Premier. An interesting point is that the Hydromatic was actually a 4-speed transmission, with 4th gear being used for standard cruising. Drivers could select S or Super on the control quadrant to lock out the 4th gear, keeping the car in 3rd for better hill climbing and more immediate power when overtaking. Power was delivered via a 336:1 rear axle ratio as standard, though a shorter 355:1 ratio was fitted to the Premier and all other automatic models. The front end was equipped with independent short and long arms, a coil spring setup featuring a stabiliser bar and direct acting shock absorbers. At the rear was semi-elliptic springs with 4 leaves on sedans and 5 on station sedans with direct acting shock absorbers, using a recirculating ball steering with a ratio of 16.8:1 and giving a 36-foot turning circle. Stopping was by 4-wheel hydraulic dual servo 9-inch or 229mm drum brakes front and rear, riding on demountable disc 13 by 4.5 J wheels, shod with tubeless 6.4 by 13 4-ply tyres, with 6-ply tyres optional for the station wagons. As a side note, the EH wagon's ingenious 2-stage folding rear seat allowed the base to flip completely over via a clever system of steel bars once the front seats were moved forward. This design transformed the interior into a flatbed over 6 feet long, making it possible to comfortably camp inside your vehicle. The EH panel van featured a high roofline for increased cargo capacity and was standard with a 149 engine. Optional with the 179 and rare automatic versions were also produced. The EH Ute may have been a half-ton workhorse, but with the 179 engine and manual shift it became a legend as a first volume produced vehicle in Australia capable of a genuine 100 miles per hour. As a matter of interest, the Ute and panel van versions ran a 355:1 rear end. However, it would be Ford's victory at the 1962 Armstrong 500 with Harry Firth and Bob Jane piloting number 21, a Falcon XL that would serve as a wake-up call for Holden. Apart from the top spot, Ford Falcon XLs took 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 8th out of a field of 8. However, despite Ford's dominance, a privately entered Holden EH number 22, driven by Barry Foster, Bob Brown and David Catlin, secured a respectable 5th place in Class B, finishing 7 laps behind the leader in what would be the final race held at Victoria's deteriorating Phillip Island circuit. The race would then move to Bathurst in 1963 and under new organisers, the Australian Racing Drivers Club, with the first national live broadcast by Network 7 coming up. This amplified its significance, prompting Holden to step up its game to enter the race. In defiance of a global racing ban imposed by its parent company GM, Holden made the daring decision to enter Bathurst. With Ford now making strong inroads into Australian motorsport, Holden's bosses felt that competing at Bathurst was a risk worth taking. Armed with a new EH body and the potent red motor, Holden set their sights on a 1963 Armstrong 500, choosing the special sedan as the foundation for their Bathurst contender. To qualify, Holden would need to manufacture at least 100 units of the car they aimed to compete in Bathurst for sale to the public. This car would officially be designated the EH 225 179M S4, but would go on to be better known simply as the EH S4, and marking Holden's first true entry into production car racing. Breaking the code down, the EH was a series code, 225 was the body style, the special sedan, 179 was the engine, with M for manual, and finally S4 for the special equipment package. The S4 would go on to be released in September 1963, shortly after the EH's release. To guarantee peak performance, Holden engineers had hand-selected the finest components directly from the production lines. These parts were used to assemble each blueprinted and balanced S4 engine with meticulous precision, resulting in a marked improvement in both mechanical refinement and throttle response. Blueprinting is a meticulous process of dismantling, measuring and machining an engine's components to ensure that every part matches its original design specifications with absolute precision, eliminating the variances found in mass production. The S4's 179 engine utilised a Bendix-Stromberg single-barrel downdraft carburettor, specifically modified with a larger power chamber and optimised jetting. This setup was instrumental in boosting both output and efficiency, while the inclusion of the automatic model's larger radiator ensured the engine remained cool under the higher operating temperatures of competitive racing. The S4 utilised the EH's 149 style 3-speed column shift manual gearbox, but featured reinforced gears with a unique bell housing specifically engineered to minimise flex under torque. Additionally, the gearshift mechanism was refined and the clutch was upgraded with improved linings and increased in diameter from the standard 8-inch to roughly 8.5 inches. It retained the standard ratios and synchromesh on second and third gears and could be identified by an S4 serial number suffix. These modifications also required several changes to the exhaust pipe shape and the shift linkages for clearance. However, contrary to popular belief, the S4 never came with a 4-speed manual gearbox. To improve acceleration up the mountain, the standard 3:36:1 final drive ratio was replaced with a shorter 3:55:1 and was housed in a robust nodular iron differential carrier. This had to be outsourced while Holden's own foundry awaited completion. Furthermore, to withstand the increased torque, the tail shaft diameter was broadened by 1/4 inch. For stopping, the S4 featured 9-inch or 229mm diameter drum brakes front and rear, as per the EH, but supported by a Repco PBR VH24 brake booster to provide enhanced pedal pressure, making it the first Holden with standard power brakes. But interestingly, the S4 never came with front disc brakes. This system acted on sintered metallic linings, specifically designed for Bathurst, which only functioned effectively once they'd reached the high racing temperatures, hence using the Repco brake booster. The brake shoe retaining springs were also upgraded to copper for better heat dissipation. While some claim these linings were standard on all S4s, others, like former Scuderia Veloci mechanic Bob Atkin, asserted they were race-only options. The EH S4 also featured Holden's first drop tank, a long-range fuel cell created by mating a production top half to an extended base. This unique modification increased the fuel capacity from the standard 9.5 gallons or 33 litres to approximately 12 gallons or 53 litres, so reducing stops on the mountain. To compensate for this additional weight, a fifth leaf was added to the rear spring pack, providing a heavy-duty suspension essential for control at high speeds. The Bathurst-style tank concept will go on to be adopted by many other teams, including Ford and Chrysler for their race specials. Bathurst racers were allowed to use Armstrong's latest sports shocks, but controlling the EH's fierce axle tramp or wheel hop, which is when the wheels lose traction and bounce or vibrate vertically, still proved very challenging. The EH's standard 4.5 by 13-inch wheels were upgraded with stronger commercial vehicle type riveted centres instead of the standard passenger cars spot welds. However, quite a number still failed during the race. They also had a different part number, and some sources suggest S4 wheels featured a 1/2 inch offset for improved handling, though this isn't mentioned in any factory documents I could find. Standard tyres were 6.4 by 13 cross plies, but Bathurst race rules fortunately permitted radials. Popular choices were the Michelin X, Pirelli Cinturato, Dunlop B7s or Goodyears. To comply with trackside repair regulations, the S4 was equipped with a more comprehensive Bathurst toolkit than the standard EH. The rules dictated that for the first 100 miles, approximately 26 laps, all maintenance and servicing had to be performed solely by the driver using the vehicle's own onboard tools. Each item in the kit was assigned an official part number and included a jack, wheel brace, various pliers, spanners and Holden's legendary 4-inch screwdriver. To bypass GM's global racing ban, marketing manager John Bagshaw had a brainwave. He channeled the S4s through select motorsport-minded dealers. You see, history often credits Holden's management for the birth of the S4, but the true story is far more clandestine. Holden's visionary, John Bagshaw, undoubtedly steered the project, the Special Equipment Programme, while the official corporate stance still remained a firm no racing. This was fuelled by a high-stakes meeting at Fisherman's Bend and driven by a group of powerful Victorian dealers who were already putting in the reps. Not just car salesmen, they held deep personal connections with the plant, bypassing corporate bureaucracy. They collaborated with Holden engineers to create a car capable of conquering the Armstrong 500. To get it on the track, Holden would have to meet the Australian Racing Drivers Club, or ARDC's 100-unit minimum production rule of cars sold and registered to the public. David Mackay of Scuderia Veloci would also play a fascinating double role in this drama. While he covered the S4 as a journalist for Modern Motor, he would also be a competitor, entering in the 1963 Armstrong 500 for Sydney's Boyded Limited, with his famous Scuderia Veloci team and co-driver Greg Cusack in car number 3, but unfortunately would not finish. Mackay paid Holden a visit and upon arriving at the factory made a startling discovery. The project was already far beyond the concept stage. The racing Holden was now a reality and being built in the shadows. Holden initially manufactured 6 S4s at Dandenong, and Mackay realised these Melbourne-built cars were not the same as the rest of the production run. These Victorian 6, which included the Holden Motors, Brian Muir and Spencer Martin entry, served as physical evidence of a secret dealer engineering alliance. These cars represented a special tier that sat above the standard S4. To those in the inner circle, these 6 units represented the true S5 specification. Clandestine, experimental machines born from a conspiracy that the Pagewood production line was never meant to replicate. Another clever move was pricing the S4 at exactly £1,160. This allowed it to scrape into Class C against the full Cortina GT, even though Holden likely lost money on every unit sold. In 1963, Wheels magazine tested the EH S4 and recorded the following: 0 to 60 in 11 seconds, the quarter mile in 19 seconds, with a top speed of 103 miles per hour, which far exceeded the mainstream 179 manual that followed in early 1964 and struggled to hit 90 miles per hour or 144 kilometers per hour. Of the 6 cars built at Dandenong, number 300, originally red and white, became Norm Beach's renowned Neptune racer. Numbers 301, 302 and 303 were intended to be the 3 Melbourne dealer race cars. One is believed to have gone to motorsport figure Lou Molina, one to the police, and the third became the Scuderia Veloci entry driven by Spencer Martin and Brian Muir. Number 304 went to Ron Beef, possibly as a Scuderia Veloci reserve car, and number 305 was also sent to the police for evaluation. Then an additional 120 units will be produced at Holden's Pagewood plant in Sydney, using sequential engine numbers starting with M14000. The Melbourne cars were primarily Winton red with Fowler's ivory roofs, whereas the Sydney cars came in different colours and featured an S4 build plate identification on the firewall. Although now there's still speculation to how many cars were actually built at Melbourne and Sydney, but that, as they say, is another story. You see, Fisherman's Bend were geared up for one-off specials, whereas Pagewood were geared up for high volumes and would do all the heavy lifting. Interestingly, Holden used other S codes apart from the S4, such as S9 or S12, which were options for taxis, police cars, fleet vehicles, etc. As soon as the S4 was released, Sydney enthusiasts immediately sought to buy it and encountered mixed outcomes. Some purchased it at the original £1,160. Others faced dealers offering it with £200 in extras and so taking it out of Class C. Some dealers even claimed ignorance of the S4 despite having them in stock, which caused tempers to fray. Then, about a week before entries closed, the first S4 entry was received by the Armstrong 500 organisers, who encountered some issues. They couldn't obtain a printed price list from either Holden or their dealers, leaving the Australian Racing Drivers Club open to protests if the S4 won. Additionally, no workshop manual was available, leaving the organisers without the necessary data for its scrutineers. Consequently, the S4 was initially rejected, causing significant criticism and even more frayed tempers. The problem was, as Holden engineers deemed the existing EJ gearbox not robust enough for the 179 engines, it prompted the creation of a pioneering new gearbox for the S4. This gearbox was released in January 1964, will be later used in the EH manual 179 vehicles. Since it was specially made for the S4, it wasn't listed in the early factory manual, leading to the Australian Racing Drivers Club, scrutineers, refusing its entry to Bathurst. However, the day before entries closed, suddenly Holden provided the necessary price list and workshop manual listing the S4. The organisers then announced the S4 would be acceptable. It is widely assumed that Holden had intentionally created this confusion and lack of available cars to minimise S4 competition for the Victorian dealer teams. The 1963 Armstrong 500 was divided into 4 classes: A, B, C and D, based on retail prices, where C included cars costing £1,101 to £1,200 Australian pounds. In those days, cars were classified by retail price and started in groups, so there was no official pole position or outright winner. In 1963, Class C consisted of 4 Cortina GTs, 6 Holden EH S4s and a somewhat surprisingly lone Holden FB. It was Class C that was expected to produce the first unofficial outright Bathurst winner. Ford's attack was led by works entries using the full Mark 1 Cortina GT and reigning Armstrong champs Harry Firth and Bob Jane in number 20, plus the Gagan brothers, Leo and Ian, driving number 21, which did not finish and only completed 105 laps due to a snap generator bracket and a thrown fan belt causing it to overheat. Because of GM's strict no racing policy, the 6 EH S4s were entered by private dealers rather than the factory, a strategic move engineered by John Bagshaw to bypass corporate restrictions. The strongest performance was anticipated from David Mackay's Scuderia Veloce, which was widely regarded as Australia's first professional motor racing operation. This entry, car number 17, was driven by the exceptionally quick Brian Yogi Muir and Spencer Martin under Holden Motors. It ultimately became Holden's first and fastest qualifier, famously outpacing the factory team of Cortina GTs. The S4s faced numerous mechanical issues and racing mishaps, preventing them from challenging the Firth Jane Cortina GT number 20, which had a flawless run and secured a runaway victory in Class C, also becoming the first car to complete the 130 lap distance. Harry Budd and Ron Smith's number 18 S4 finished 5th with 123 laps, 7 laps behind the winner, while the S4 number 23, driven by Ian Grant and Trevor Marden, came 6th with 120 laps. Kevin Bartlett and Bill Reynolds in the number 16 S4 finished 7th with 115 laps, 15 laps down after suffering 2 broken wheels. However, the highly regarded Scuderia Veloce S4, driven by Spencer Martin and Brian Muir, number 17, ended up 9th with 111 laps after a centre bolt in one of the rear leaf springs broke, snapping the tail shaft. They lost about 19 laps in the pits repairing the damage and using only the car standard toolkit. The S4 shared by Jim O'Shaughnessy and John Brindley, number 17, was out after 65 laps when O'Shaughnessy famously rolled it approaching the dipper. It was Ralph Satch and Fred Morgan's S4 number 15 that was placed highest, finishing 2nd in Class C and overall, more than a full lap behind the winning Cortina after a lengthy repair stop caused by a rear end collision. For the record, the lone grey engine FB number 24, driven by Lex Bailey and Phil McCuminsky, outperformed 2 S4s, number 14 and number 17, cruising to 8th with 115 laps, only 15 laps behind the winner. Although the S4 finished 2nd to the full Cortina GT, it would be the S4's strong performance that would pave the way for Holden's future successes in motorsport. The Ford Bathurst Cortina Mark 1 GT was not only smaller and more agile than the S4, but it was also about 300 kilograms lighter and equipped with superior front disc brakes, a massive advantage along with the Cortina's better fuel economy and lower consumption of tyres and brakes made it a far superior Bathurst contender. The S4 could have and should have won. For its time, the handling and performance were very good. The full Cortina GT and EHS4 were the only entrants to complete the 1963 Armstrong 500 full race distance. In the immediate aftermath of the 1963 Armstrong 500, the official results were a mess due to manual lap scoring errors, which briefly promoted third-placed Bruce McPhee and Graham Ryan, driving the number 13 Cortina GT to 2nd, and following a post-race dispute, the number 15 S4 was eventually reinstated to its runner-up position. Funnily enough, a famous piece of Bathurst folklore suggests that a sudden gust of wind blew the official lap charts out of the control tower window. forcing the officials to reconstruct a race order from memory and unofficial team notes. While the Cortinas and Minis benefited from purpose-built racing rubber, the Holden was restricted to standard rims, which were not flanged for competition tyres. Despite being significantly faster, even on cross-plies, the EH's sheer pace proved too much for its wheels, causing frequent buckling and breakage under heavy cornering loads. Publicly, Holden claimed the EH-S4 was merely a production test vehicle to evaluate a manual transmission for the 179 engine. In reality, it was a bullet aimed directly at the 1963 Armstrong 500 at Bathurst. By early 1964, storming Norman Beechey harnessed the S4's potential, boosting his Neptune Oil-sponsored Holden to a staggering 230 horsepower. At the Lakeside ATCC, Beechey campaigned a car with wider rims and a brake booster, surging from the third row to the lead. Despite a botched pit stop and clutch trouble, he finished a close second, just 1.5 seconds behind Ian Gagan's Cortina, with fellow S4 driver Brian Muir securing 7th. Had the S4 returned to Bathurst in 1964, its 120 mph top speed and superior acceleration would likely have outclassed the Cortina GTs. Instead, GM's rigid no racing policy mandated the standard model. Recognising the standard S4 would struggle against the newer Cortinas in 1964, leading Holden dealers Bill Patterson and Bibb Stilwell pushed for a more radical package. Their vision included a 4-speed gearbox, front disc brakes, upgrades aimed at fixing the EH's mechanical shortcomings and making it truly competitive for another year at Bathurst. Of the 7 cars that finished Class C at the 1964 Armstrong 500, 6 were Cortina GTs, with a lone Holden EH 179 number 16, driven by Phil Ismay and Bob Skelton, finishing 7th after 101 laps, although there was another Cortina and 2 Holdens that didn't finish. The Holden EH S4 would not go on to compete in any other major races after 1964. For the EH S4, the 1963 Bathurst campaign ultimately fell short, but the odds were heavily stacked against them. Their primary rival, Harry Firth, spent months meticulously stress testing his Cortina GTs in various touring car events to refine the components for Mount Panorama. Firth also enjoyed the formidable backing of the Ford Motor Company, where Holden was officially a company forbidden from racing. These Holdens were completely unproven in competition. The EH range had only been available to the public for a matter of weeks. Scuderia Veloce's chief mechanic, Bob Atkins, said,
They were too new. Nobody had enough experience with them, and you couldn't really expect to beat a proven car like the Cortina GT without a lot of testing.
However, the very existence of the S4 proves that Holden's local management was deadly serious about its victory. The S4 program had been set in motion months before the EH's official release, with the Special 4 arriving in showrooms almost immediately after the standard range debuted. For a company operating under a global racing ban, it was a remarkable, well-orchestrated first attempt at a limited edition homologation special. Holden wouldn't try Bathurst again until 1968 with the V8-powered Monaro GTS 327, where it would go on to take the top 3 spots. However, the Holden red straight 6 motor would eventually taste victory at Bathurst and in 1972, but powered by the larger 202 with a triple Stromberg setup in the Tirana GTR XU1. It was this legendary combination that secured Peter Brock's first mountain win, and oddly, the same model in which Mark Scaife would launch his own career 15 years later. In February 1965, Holden would introduce the HD model, which showed more than a passing resemblance to the Vauxhall FC Victor. It was also the first model to take the 179 a step further, with a 179x2, which included twin downdraft Stromberg carburetors, boosting output to 140 horsepower. The X2 featured a performance-profiled steel camshaft and a unique twin manifold setup, and contrary to popular belief, it was never ever available on EH. These engines were easily identified by the specific 179X prefix stamped into the block. Vehicles fitted with X2 engines were identified by a red L-shaped arrow featuring the X2 badge on either the grille or the rear decal, along with the rocker cover labelled X2. A common misconception suggests they were painted blue, but all factory X2 units were painted Holden red, with the only exception being black painted Mercruiser marine engines. However, some say the S4 variant was used as a testbed, and this is where a number of myths and fractured facts appear. Unfortunately, as no real official documentation exists for the S4 or its variants. I've had to piece together what I could find. So let's start with the S5. Internal documents from May 1963 prove that Holden secretly built 6 special cars designated as S5 models. Only 6 were built, intended for the top Victorian dealer teams, while the EHS4 is celebrated as the spark that ignited the Australian muscle car era. A deeper mystery lies buried in Holden's archives. For decades, enthusiasts whispered about the Melbourne 6 mysterious cars produced in Victoria that seem to possess a DNA distinct from the standard Sydney-built S4s. Recent discoveries of internal 1963 Holden documents have finally pulled back the curtain that these weren't just S4s. They were the mysterious S5, a clandestine experimental evolution designed to push the limits of the General Motors racing band. Internal memos from May and August 1963 revealed that Holden was secretly running 2 parallel programs. The S4 was a production special destined for the public, and the S5, 6 elite units delivered directly to the engineering department for competition optimization. While the S4 was impressive, the S5 was an engineering masterpiece. Internal correspondence between manufacturing manager A.G. Gibbs and the Woodfield plant manager detailed specific upgrades to the S5 that went far beyond the S4's specifications. Unlike the regular S4s, these 6 S5s featured engines hand-built by Holden's experimental department. They were blueprinted, balanced and dynamometer tested before being fitted to the cars. The S5 was also lined up for a different camshaft profile to improve top-end performance on Conrod Straight, plus plans also included metallic brake linings and power assistance. They were also uniquely fitted with a laminated windscreen, a crucial safety feature for high-speed motor racing. This document also revealed a lost branch of the family tree, the 149 S4. You see, Holden originally considered building 125 sets of performance parts for the smaller 149 cubic inch engine. This was a strategic move to dominate Class C, or the 1001 to 1200 Australian pounds, where the EH could more easily beat the Cortina GTs. Ultimately, the 149 S4 was scrapped, leaving the 179 S4 to fight an uphill battle. If the S5 was so superior, why is it a footnote in history? The answer lies in the General Motors global racing ban. In 1963, Holden was operating in total secrecy. A memo dated August 12 warns that the entire program could be in jeopardy if senior management or Detroit discovered the extent of what was going on. Deadline for the Armstrong 500 approached. The 100-mile-an-hour Holden sports car was gaining too much media attention, so to avoid any ramifications from GM, Holden pulled the plug on the S5. Holden jettisoned the Victorian dealer entries, the experimental engines were obscured, and the S5 was effectively erased from public record. Well, what do you think? Could these 6 cars have been the original Melbourne 6? If you know any more, let me know in the comments. This close brush with Detroit's RAF was so severe that it took 5 years before Holden dared to build another dedicated Bathurst special. As already mentioned, it would be the 1968 HK Monaro GTS 327. Now, going back to the lead up to the 1964 Armstrong 500, the Australian motoring world was electrified by a singular rumour. Holden was secretly developing a successor to the S4. This is where the legend, dubbed the S22, an 105-mile-per-hour Phantom, was whispered to be the ultimate EH, a car designed to end the full Cortina's dominance once and for all. While the S22 never officially reached the showroom, the evidence suggests that something clandestine was indeed brewing behind the closed doors of Fisherman's Bend. The S22 wasn't just idle gossip. The reports at the time were remarkably specific. In October 1964, Australian Motorsport magazine reported that Holden had secretly commissioned 100 specialised oil sumps from an external supplier, which suggests a production run designed to meet the minimum homologation requirements for racing, 100 units. Also, a reporter for Racing Car News claimed to have briefly spotted a disc-braked EH at the Pagewood plant in late 1963. He was then reportedly dragged away by security before he could document the car, fueling more theories and conspiracies that Holden was testing advanced braking systems long before their official release. However, it could have just been a test mule for the upcoming HD models, suspension and braking systems. Also, if completed, the S22 would have required a new ball joint front suspension to accommodate its disc brakes. However, an internal memo from October 1963 revealed significant development problems with this system. Following a media frenzy over the 100-mile-an-hour Holden sports car in 1963, Holden was under intense scrutiny from General Motors. Any overt move to build a second homologation special would have risked a total shutdown of the performance department by Detroit Sevies. If the S22 was intended to save Holden's pride in 1964, why did it vanish? The S22 still remains one of the greatest mysteries in Australian automotive lore. Whether it was a genuine project killed off by cautious management or a clever smoke and mirrors campaign to keep Ford on its toes, it represented the moment Holden truly understood the win on Sunday, sell on Monday mentality. Although the S22 never reached production or turned a wheel at Mount Panorama, its legend paved the way for the HRX2 and the eventual birth of the Monaro. The HS4 and its siblings share a true captivating history, but do we have the full picture? If you have any rare details or stories about the S4 or its lesser known siblings and its role in these intriguing events, it would be great to hear from you in the comments. The Holden EH was more than just a car. It was a phenomenon, produced in a remarkably brief 18-month window between August 1963 and February 1965. It became Holden's best-selling vehicle and remains the fastest-selling Australian motor car of all time, with a staggering 256,959 units finding homes. This milestone was built on the back of the legendary Red engine. This robust power plant didn't just enhance reliability, it became the soundtrack of the 70s. Because they became dirt cheap on the used car market, a generation of enthusiasts could transform a humble EH by adding triple Webers, ported heads and a hot cam into a V8 slaying monster. Beyond the street, the S4 program proved to be a masterstroke of engineering and marketing. The secret drivetrain components developed for Bathurst, the hardened gearbox, heavy-duty clutch and beefier tail shaft were so successful that they were integrated into the mainstream 179 manual models launched in February 1964. Whether it was a standard family runabout, the special equipment S4 or the clandestine S5 or S22 experimental units, the EH bridged the gap between daily transport and dedicated competition. It didn't just put Australia on wheels, it set a definitive blueprint for the Australian muscle car era, cementing its place as a beloved icon that continues to captivate collectors today.